Henry's first wife was Catalina Trastamara, otherwise known as Catherine of Aragon. Today her name is most commonly spelled with a C, but she spelled and signed her name with a K. Catherine and Henry were married for 23 years, 11 months and 12 days. Catherine's motto as Queen of England was humble and loyal. Her badge symbol is a crowned pomegranate. The pomegranate is an ancient symbol for fertility and regeneration. It would have been seen as a very apt symbol for Catherine and the promise of heirs that her marriage brought. The crown is an emblem of victory and sovereignty. Its significance as the decoration is the ultimate level of rank and power. Catherine was quite short in stature. She was of a very fair complexion, had blue eyes and had hair colour that was between reddish blonde and auburn. In her youth she was described as the most beautiful creature in the world, and that there was nothing lacking in her that the most beautiful girl should have. Thomas More and Lord Herbert would reflect later in her lifetime that in regard to her appearance, that there were few women who could compete with the Queen in her prime. She was the youngest surviving child of King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile. At an early age, Catherine was considered a suitable wife for Arthur, Prince of Wales, heir apparent to the English throne, due to the English ancestry she inherited from her mother. The two were married by proxy on the 19th of May 1499 and corresponded by writing each other letters in Latin. When Arthur turned 15, it was decided that they were old enough to be married in person. On the 4th of November, they met for the first time. They spoke to each other in Latin, but found that they could not understand each other's spoken conversation because they had learned different Latin pronunciations. Once married, the couple were sent to live at Ludlow Castle on the border of Wales. A few months later, they both became ill, possibly with sweating sickness, which was sweeping the area at the time. Arthur died on the 2nd of April 1502. He was only 16 years old. Catherine recovered to find herself a teenage widow. A papal dispensation was obtained to enable her to marry Henry, though the marriage did not take place until after Henry came to the throne in 1509, 7 years after Arthur's death. She was 23 and Henry was 18. On Saturday the 23rd of June 1509, the traditional eve of coronation procession to Westminster was greeted by a large and enthusiastic crowd. As was the custom, the couple spent the night before their coronation at the Tower of London. On Midsummer's Day, Sunday the 24th of June 1509, Henry VIII and Catherine were anointed and crowned together by the Archbishop of Canterbury at a lavish ceremony at Westminster Abbey. In August 1509, 2 months after the wedding, Catherine's first pregnancy was announced. On the 31st of January 1510, she delivered a stillborn girl. Catherine was pregnant 7 times altogether. In May 1510, 4 months after the loss of her first child, Catherine announced her second pregnancy. A son, Henry, Duke of Cornwall, was born on the 1st of January 1511. On the 22nd of February, after only 52 days of life, the young prince died. By early 1513, Catherine was pregnant again. On the 30th of June, she was left as regent while Henry went to fight in France. On the 17th of September, she went into labour prematurely and gave birth to a boy who died shortly after. In June 1514, Catherine announced her fourth pregnancy. On the 8th of January 1515, she gave birth to a stillborn boy. In the summer of 1515, Catherine announced her fifth pregnancy. However, less hope was placed on her heir following her previous pregnancies. On the 18th of February 1516, Catherine delivered a healthy girl at 4 a.m. at Greenwich Palace in Kent. She was named Mary and christened 3 days later. Despite his evident disappointment, Henry said that if it were a girl this time, then surely healthy boys would follow. In the autumn of 1517, Catherine suffered another miscarriage. In February 1518, Catherine announced her seventh pregnancy. On the 10th of November 1518, she gave birth to a daughter, but the child lived only a few hours. On the 11th of June 1513, Henry appointed Catherine regent in England with the titles of Governor of the Realm and Captain General while he went to France on a military campaign. The Scots invaded, and on the 3rd of September 1513, she ordered Thomas Lovell to raise an army. Catherine rode north in full armour to address the troops. Despite being heavily pregnant at the time, she sent a letter to Henry along with a piece of the bloodied coat of King James IV of Scotland, who died in the battle, for Henry to use as a banner. In 1520, Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, paid a state visit to England, and she urged Henry to enter an alliance with Charles rather than with France. Immediately after his departure, she accompanied Henry to France on the celebrated visit of Francis I, the Field of the Cloth of Gold. Within 2 years, war was declared against France, and the Emperor was once again welcome in England, where plans were afoot to betroth him to Catherine's daughter, the Princess Mary. In 1525, Henry VIII became enamoured of Anne Boleyn, a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine. Catherine's behaviour to Anne was impeccable. At first, Catherine tried to help Anne resist Henry's advances. At a card game Catherine instigated with Anne, Catherine's famous remark to Anne was, "My Lady Anne, you have good hap to stop at a king, but you are not like others. You will have all or none." When a lady spoke ill of Anne, Catherine said, "Pray for her, because the time will come when you shall pity and lament her case." Catherine was no longer able to bear children by this time. Henry began to believe that his marriage was cursed and sought confirmation from the Bible, which he interpreted to say that if a man marries his brother's wife, the couple will be childless, even if her marriage to Arthur had not been consummated, and Catherine would insist to her dying day that she had came to Henry's bed a virgin. Henry's interpretation of that Bible passage meant that their marriage had been wrong in the eyes of God. It soon became the one absorbing object of Henry's desires to secure an annulment. Catherine was defiant when it was suggested that she quietly retire to a nunnery, saying, "God never called me to a nunnery. I am the king's true and legitimate wife." Wolsey went so far as to convene an ecclesiastical court in England, with a representative of the Pope presiding, and Henry and Catherine herself in attendance. The Pope had no intention of allowing a decision to be reached in England, and his legate was recalled. The Pope forbade Henry to marry again before a decision was given in Rome. Wolsey had failed and was dismissed from public office in 1529. Wolsey then began a secret plot to have Anne Boleyn forced into exile, and began communicating with the Pope to that end. When this was discovered, Henry ordered Wolsey's arrest, and had he not been terminally ill and died in 1530, he'd most likely have been executed for treason. When Henry decided to annul his marriage to Catherine, John Fisher became her most trusted counsellor and one of her chief supporters. He appeared in the legate's court on her behalf, where he shocked people with the directness of his language, and by declaring that, like John the Baptist, he was ready to die on behalf of the insolubility of marriage. Henry was so enraged by this that he wrote a long Latin address in answer to Fisher's speech. The removal of the cause to Rome ended Fisher's role in this matter, but Henry never forgave him. Until the end of her life, Catherine would refer to herself as Henry's only lawful wedded wife and England's only rightful queen, and her servants continued to address her by that title. Henry refused her the right to any title but Dowager Princess of Wales, in recognition of her position as his brother's widow. In 1535 she was transferred to Kimbolton Castle. There she confined herself to one room, which she left only to attend Mass, dressed in the hair shirt of the Order of St. Francis, and fasted constantly. She was forbidden to see her daughter Mary. They were also forbidden to communicate in writing, but sympathisers discreetly ferried letters between the two. Henry offered both mother and daughter better quarters and permission to see each other if they would acknowledge Anne Boleyn as the new queen. In late December 1535, sensing her death was near, Catherine made her will and wrote to her nephew, the Emperor Charles V, asking him to protect her daughter, Mary. Catherine died at Kimbolton Castle on the 7th of January 1536. The following day, news of her death reached the king. At the time, there were rumours that she was poisoned, but it was most likely cancer of the heart. On the day of Catherine's funeral, Anne Boleyn miscarried a boy. Catherine was buried in Peterborough Cathedral, with the ceremony due to her position as a Dowager Princess of Wales and not a queen. Henry did not attend the funeral and forbade Mary to attend. Her tomb can be seen by the public, and there is hardly a time when it is not decorated with flowers or pomegranates. Henry's second wife was Anne Boleyn. Anne and Henry were married for 2 years, 11 months and 19 days. As Queen, Anne's motto was, "The most happy." Her badge symbol is a crowned falcon holding a sceptre on a tree stump with red and white flowers sprouting. The white falcon was derived from the heraldic crest of the Earls of Ormond, as her father had been recognised as the heir. The falcon denotes someone who was fond of the highest pursuits. Hunting and falconry were such pursuits in the days of heraldry. The tree stump or woodstock referred to Henry VIII's right to the throne, but this combined with the falcon landing on it and roses bursting forth spoke clearly of life bursting forth from the Tudor stock. In other words, Anne's fertility and ability to bear sons. The roses on Anne Boleyn's badge are not the Tudor roses, but rather the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York. This is also referring to Henry VIII's right to the throne of England through his father Henry Tudor, Earl of Richmond, a Lancastrian, and his mother Elizabeth of York. They brought the claims of the Lancastrian and Yorkists together. The crown is an imperial crown rather than a monarch's crown. The sceptre not only refers to Henry and Anne as king and queen, but is also a symbol of God-given authority. She was of tall height, had olive-coloured skin, thick dark brown hair so long she could sit on it, and dark brown eyes which often appeared black. Those large dark eyes were often singled out in descriptions of Anne. She had a considerably strong nose and a definite wide mouth with very slim lips. Nicholas Sander described Anne as rather tall of stature, with black hair and an oval face of sallow complexion. She had a projecting tooth under her upper lip, and on her right hand had 6 fingers. A servant of Wolsey's recalled how Anne stood out among the women at court for her excellent grace and behaviour. The French courtier Brantôme, in his memoirs, talked about how Anne dressed with marvellous taste, which was copied by all the fashionable ladies at court. The people of England described Anne as a goggly-eyed whore. The Venetian ambassador described Anne as not one of the handsomest women in the world. She is of middling stature with a swarthy complexion, long neck, wide mouth, bosom not much raised, and her eyes, which are black and beautiful, take great effect on those who serve her. Anne was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, later Earl of Wiltshire and Earl of Ormond, and his wife, Lady Elizabeth Howard. Later tradition would say that the Boleyns were practically middle class, but recent research has proven that Anne Boleyn was born a great lady. Her great-grandparents included a Lord Mayor of London, a Duke, an Earl, 2 aristocratic ladies and a knight. She was certainly far better born than 3 of Henry's other wives, Jane Seymour, Catherine Parr, or her cousin, Catherine Howard. Anne's early education was typical for a woman of her class. Her academic education was limited to arithmetic, her family genealogy, grammar, history, reading, spelling, and writing. She also developed domestic skills such as dancing, embroidery, good manners, household management, music, needlework, and singing, and learned to play games such as cards, chess, and dice. And she was also taught archery, falconry, horseback riding, and hunting in the ladylike side saddle. Anne's father secured a place with Margaret, Archduchess of Austria. Anne stayed with Margaret from spring 1513 until her father arranged for her to attend Henry VIII's sister, Mary, who was about to marry Louis XII of France in October 1514. In France, Anne was a maid of honour to Queen Mary, and then to Mary's 15-year-old stepdaughter, Queen Claude, with whom she stayed nearly 7 years. Anne's European education ended in 1521, when her father summoned her back to England. Mary Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's older sister, had earlier been recalled from France in late 1519. Ostensibly to end her affairs with the French king and his courtiers. She married William Carey, a minor noble, in February 1520 at Greenwich, with Henry VIII in attendance. Soon after, Mary Boleyn became the English king's mistress. There is a possibility that Henry was the father of one or both of Mary Boleyn's children born during her first marriage. Anne was courted by Henry Percy and entered into a secret betrothal with him. The romance was broken off when Percy's father refused to support their engagement. Cardinal Wolsey refused the match also. Anne was sent from court to her family's countryside estates. Upon her return to court, she entered into the service of Catherine of Aragon. In 1526, Henry VIII became enamoured of Anne and began his pursuit. Anne was a skillful player at the game of courtly love, which was often played in the antechambers. This may have been how she caught the eye of Henry, who was also an experienced player. Anne resisted the king's attempts to seduce her, refusing to become his mistress and often leaving court for the seclusion of Hever Castle. But within a year he proposed marriage to her and she accepted. Both assumed an annulment could be obtained within a matter of months. Anne saw an opportunity in Henry's infatuation and the convenient moral quandary. She determined that she would yield to his embraces only as his acknowledged queen. She began to take her place at his side in policy and in state, but not yet in his bed. In 1528, sweating sickness broke out with great severity. In London, the mortality rate was great and the court was dispersed. Henry left London, frequently changing his residence. Anne Boleyn retreated to the Boleyn residence at Hever Castle, but contracted the illness. Henry sent his own physician to Hever to care for Anne, and shortly afterwards she recovered. She wrote this letter to Wolsey in thanks for the gift and letter he sent her while she was ill. My Lord, in my most humble wise that my poor heart can think, I do thank your grace for your kind letter and for your rich and goodly present, the which I shall never be able to deserve without your help, of which I have hitherto had so great plenty that all the days of my life I am most bound of all creatures, next the King's grace, to love and serve your grace, of the which I beseech you never to doubt that ever I shall vary from this thought, as long as any breath is in my body, and as touching your grace's troubles with the sweat, I thank our Lord that I am desired and prayed for are escaped, and that is the King's grace and you, not doubting that God has preserved you both for great causes, known alonely of his high wisdom. And as for the coming of the legate, I desire that much, and if it be God's pleasure, I pray him to send this matter shortly to a good end, and then I trust, my Lord, to recompense part of your great pains, in the which I must require you, in the meantime, to accept my good will in the stead of the power, the which must proceed partly from you, as our Lord knoweth, whom I beseech to send you long life, with countenance in honour, written by the hand of her that is most bound to be your humble and obedient servant, Anne Boleyn. On the 1st of September 1533, Henry granted her the title of Marquess of Pembroke. Sometime near the end of 1532, Anne finally gave way, and by December she was pregnant. To avoid any question of the legitimacy of the child, Henry was forced into action. Sometime near St. Paul's Day, which is January 25th, in 1533, Anne and Henry were secretly married. Although the king's marriage to Catherine was not dissolved, in the king's mind it had never existed, so he was free to marry whomever he wanted. On May 23rd, the Archbishop officially proclaimed that the marriage of Henry and Catherine was invalid. Anne was crowned Queen Consort on the 1st of June 1533 in a magnificent ceremony at Westminster Abbey, with a banquet afterwards. She was the last Queen Consort of England to be crowned separately from her husband. Unlike any other Queen Consort, Anne was crowned with St. Edward's crown, which had previously been used to crown only a monarch. This was most likely done because Anne's pregnancy was visible by then, and she was carrying the heir, who was presumed to be male. The coronation was not a success, despite its expense. Anne was not popular with the people of England. Insults were shouted and mocking laughter was heard. Anne settled into a quiet routine at the king's favourite residence, Greenwich Palace, to prepare for the birth of her baby. The child was born slightly premature on the 7th of September 1533, between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. Anne gave birth to a girl who was christened Elizabeth, but the birth of a girl was a heavy blow to her parents, since they had confidently expected a boy. The French king had already been asked to stand as his godfather. Now the prepared letters announcing the birth of a prince had an S hastily added to read princess. and the traditional jousting tournament for the birth of an heir was cancelled. Nevertheless, the infant princess was given a splendid christening, but Anne feared that Catherine's daughter Mary, now stripped of her title of princess, posed a threat to Elizabeth's position. Henry soothed his wife's fears by separating Mary from her many servants and sending her to serve at Hatfield House, where Princess Elizabeth would be living with her own sizable staff, and frequently visited her daughter at Hatfield. After a stillbirth or miscarriage around Christmas 1534, Henry was discussing with Cranmer and Cromwell the possibility of divorcing her without having to return to Catherine. Nothing came of the issue, as the royal couple reconciled and spent the summer of 1535 on progress. On the 8th of January 1536, news of Catherine of Aragon's death reached the King and Anne. The following day, Henry and Anne wore yellow from head to toe and celebrated Catherine's death with festivities. Spain saw this as mocking. In Spain, the home country of Catherine, yellow was the colour of mourning, while in England it was the colour of joy. Anne, pregnant again, was aware of the dangers if she failed to give birth to a son. With Catherine dead, Henry would be free to marry without any taint of illegality. At this time, Henry began paying court to Jane Seymour. He gave her a locket with a miniature portrait of himself inside. In the presence of Anne, she began opening and shutting it. Anne responded by ripping off the locket with such force her fingers bled. Later that month, the king was unhorsed in a jousting tournament and knocked unconscious for 2 hours, a worrying incident that Anne believed led to her miscarriage 5 days later. Another possible cause of the miscarriage was an incident in which, upon entering a room, Anne saw Jane Seymour sitting on Henry's lap and flew into a rage. Whatever the cause, on the day of Catherine of Aragon's burial, Anne miscarried a deformed male child. As Anne recovered from her miscarriage, Henry declared that he had been seduced into the marriage by means of deception and spells. His new mistress, Jane Seymour, was quickly moved into royal quarters. Towards the end of April 1536, a Flemish musician in Anne's service named Mark Smeaton was arrested. He initially denied being the Queen's lover, but later confessed, perhaps tortured or promised freedom. Sir Henry Norris was arrested on May Day. Sir Francis Weston was arrested 2 days later on the same charge, as was Sir William Brereton and Sir Thomas Wyatt. The final accused was Queen Anne's own brother, George Boleyn, arrested on charges of incest and treason. He was accused of 2 incidents of incest on November 1535 at Whitehall and the following month at Eltham. On the 2nd of May 1536, Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London by barge. In the Tower she collapsed, demanding to know the location of her father and brother, as well as the charges against her. 4 of the accused men were tried in Westminster on the 12th of May 1536. All publicly maintained their innocence, and only the tortured Smeaton supported the Crown by pleading guilty. 3 days later, Anne and George Boleyn were tried separately in the Tower of London before a jury of 27 peers. She was accused of adultery, incest and high treason. By the Treason Act of Edward III, adultery on the part of a queen was a form of treason because of the implications for the succession to the throne, for which the penalty was hanging, drawing and quartering for a man and burning alive for a woman. But the accusations, and especially that of incestuous adultery, were all designed to impugn her moral character. The other form of treason alleged against her was that of plotting the king's death with her lovers so that she might later marry Sir Henry Norris. It was George's wife, Jane, who gave the damning evidence. She said there was a familiarity between the Queen and her brother beyond what so near a relationship could justify. On the 14th of May, Cranmer declared Anne's marriage to Henry null and void. Although the evidence against them was unconvincing, the accused were found guilty and condemned to death. George Boleyn and the other accused men were executed on the 17th of May, 1536. Henry commuted Anne's sentence from burning to beheading, and rather than have a queen beheaded with the common axe, he brought an expert swordsman from France. Shortly before dawn, she called to hear mass and swore on the eternal salvation of her soul upon the holy sacraments that she had never been unfaithful to the king. She repeated this oath both immediately before and after receiving the holy sacrament. On the morning of Friday the 19th of May, Anne was executed within the Tower precincts. She wore a red petticoat under a loose dark grey gown of damask trimmed in fur and mantle of ermine. Accompanied by 2 female attendants, Anne made her final walk from the Queen's house to the scaffold. She climbed the scaffold and made a short speech to the crowd. Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that, whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the king, and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. And to me he was ever a good and gentle and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all. I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I condemn my soul. The ermine mantle was removed and Anne lifted off her headdress, tucking her hair under her coif. After a brief farewell to her weeping ladies and a request for prayers, she knelt down and one of her ladies tied a blindfold over her eyes. She knelt upright in the French style of execution. Her final prayer consisted of her repeating continually, Jesus, receive my soul. O Lord God, have pity on my soul. Jesus, receive my soul. O Lord God, have pity on my soul. The execution consisted of a single stroke. She was then buried in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. Her skeleton was identified during renovations of the chapel in 1876. In the reign of Queen Victoria, and Anne's grave is now identified on the marble floor. Henry's third wife was Jane Seymour. Jane and Henry were married for 1 year, 4 months and 24 days. Jane's motto was bound to obey and serve. Her badge is a crowned phoenix rising from a castle between 2 red and white roses. The phoenix is a symbol of immortality, rebirth and renewal, the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. In this era, the phoenix was also a symbol of true love. The castle is an emblem of grandeur and society. The castle signifies power as well as home and safety. The roses represent the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York. Jane was the daughter of Sir John Seymour and Marjorie Wentworth. She was most likely born at Wolf Hall in Wiltshire, although West Bower Manor in Somerset has also been suggested. Her birth date is not recorded. Various accounts use anywhere from 1504 to 1509, but it is generally estimated as occurring in 1508. Through her maternal grandfather, she was a descendant of King Edward III's son, Lionel of Antwerp, 1st Duke of Clarence. Because of this, she and King Henry were 5th cousins. She shared a great-grandmother, Elizabeth Cheney, with his 2nd and 5th wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Jane was not as highly educated as Henry's 1st and 2nd wives, Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. She could read and write a little, but was much better at needlework and household management, which were considered much more necessary for women. Her needlework was reported to be beautiful and elaborate. Jane became a maid of honour in 1532 to Queen Catherine and went on to serve Queen Anne. The first report of Henry VIII's interest in Jane was in February 1536, about 3 months before Anne's execution. She was described as of middling stature and very pale, with watery grey eyes, but not of much beauty, and a woman of the utmost charm. She was regarded as a meek, gentle, simple and chaste woman whose large family made her a suitable candidate to give birth to many children. Henry VIII was betrothed to Jane on the 20th of May 1536. Just 1 day after Anne Boleyn's execution, they were married at the Palace of Whitehall in the Queen's Closet by Bishop Gardiner on the 30th of May 1536. This is the marriage deed for Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. She was publicly proclaimed Queen on the 4th of June 1536. Her well-publicised sympathy for the late Queen Catherine and her daughter Mary showed her to be compassionate and made her a popular figure with the common people and most of the courtiers. She was never crowned because of a plague in London where the coronation was to take place. Henry may have been reluctant to have her crowned before she had fulfilled her duty as a queen consort by bearing him a son and male heir. As Queen, Jane was said to be strict and formal. The lavish entertainments, gaiety and extravagance of the Queen's household, which had reached its peak during the time of Anne Boleyn, was replaced by a strict enforcement of decorum. For example, she banned the French fashions that Anne had introduced, and she herself favoured the English hood and damask rather than silk. Politically, Jane appeared to have been conservative. Her only reported involvement in national affairs in 1536 was when she asked for pardons for the participants in the Pilgrimage of Grace. Henry is said to have rejected this, reminding her of the fate of her predecessor when she meddled in his affairs. Jane formed a close relationship with her stepdaughter Mary. She put forth much effort to restore Mary to court and to the royal succession, behind any children that she might have with Henry. She brought up the issue of Mary's restoration both before and after she became queen. While she was unable to restore Mary to the line of succession, she was able to reconcile her with Henry. In January 1537, Jane became pregnant. During her pregnancy, she developed a craving for quail, which Henry ordered for her from Calais and Flanders. During the summer, she took no public engagements and led a relatively quiet life, being attended by the royal physicians and the best midwives in the kingdom. She went into confinement in September 1537. She gave birth to the coveted male heir, the future King Edward, at 2 o'clock in the morning on the 12th of October 1537 at Hampton Court Palace. Edward was christened on the 15th of October without his mother in attendance, as was the custom. Jane's labour had been difficult, lasting 2 days and 3 nights, probably because the baby was not well positioned. After the christening, it became clear she was seriously ill. She died on the 24th of October 1537 at Hampton Court Palace. Within a few weeks of her death, there were conflicting testimonies concerning the cause. From the current day, there are various speculations that have been offered. Her death may have been due to an infection from a retained placenta, or it could have been puerperal fever following a bacterial infection, or even a pulmonary embolism. Jane was buried on the 12th of November 1537 in St George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. Her stepdaughter Mary acted as chief mourner. A procession of 29 mourners followed Mary, one for every year of Queen Jane's life. She was the only one of Henry's wives to receive a queen's funeral. Her epitaph read, "Here lies Jane, a phoenix who died in giving another phoenix birth. Let her be mourned, for birds like these are rare indeed." And this concludes the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button, give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe for future videos. Thank you.